Hi, I'm DK and welcome to my channel where I draw and talk about manga, anime, manhwa, and more. Today I'll be showing a time lapse of some characters I drew related to the topic of this video. My top favorite OG Isekai manga I still enjoy to this day that you probably haven't heard of. Just a heads up that there will be some spoilers, so if you want to skip those parts to read it on your own, I will timestamp them in the video. Although I do hope you come back to see if you share similar thoughts as me. I do want to preface this by saying that these are my thoughts, and if you agree or disagree with me, that's up to you. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions. Growing up, I really enjoyed, and still do, reading manga where the protagonists are brought into a new world, although usually against their own will. Sometimes it was something they wished for because they didn't like how their life was. Other times they had some regrets left behind, the famous Truxan, or hope they can find some way to return home. I was fascinated by the worlds they were thrown into and how they learned to adapt. This is known as the term isekai, which has become very popular with multitudes of anime and manga chugging these out. While they may seem tropey and cliche now, there were a few OG, in my opinion, manga that I still enjoy rereading to this day. I couldn't choose between one, so I'll be talking about my top two. These are in the romance shoujo realm. The manga are also older. They came out around the 90s, and you can definitely tell through the art style. Now, the first manga I'll be talking about is Sora wa Akai Kawa no Hotori, or Red River slash Anatolia Story, from the English licensed version. 15-year-old Yuri Suzuki was just kissed by her childhood friend and now possible lover Himuro. As she is on cloud 9, strange occurrences begin happening around her whenever water is involved. After many attempts, a hand comes out from a puddle when Yuri meets up with Himuro and she is pulled into the past to Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire in 14th century BC. Queen Nakia, the main antagonist, summoned her as a sacrifice to ensure her son becomes the crown prince and future king. Of course, things don't go as planned. Yuri first meets Prince Kale, the male lead. Prince Kale is the top contender to becoming the crown prince. With the two's meeting, things don't go according to plan for Queen Nakia, and they continue to play a game of cat and mouse as she persistently tries to kill Yuri. With the summary out of the way, let's go into the details, starting with the characters. While there were many characters that came along the way and the tragedies of some that I am still aching over, I'll be talking about and slightly gushing about some that I grew to like. My favorite still is Prince Kale, the male lead. He definitely started my unrealistic ideal of how a man should treat a woman. Of course, he's not perfect and goes through a lot of character growth, from being a playboy who didn't care about the myriad of women he played in his hands, for he knew they were mainly after his title, to carefully choosing how he displayed his affections to Yuri, who grew up in a world with no internal conflicts or it is kind of understandable with how much wrath Queen Akia held toward him, since she knew he was valuable to the king and how she would do anything to have him lose the ability to have the crown prince title. Which is one of the reasons why I love this story so much. The character growth between these two and how they learned from each other just squeezed at my heart. Even the progression in their romance was well paced, from Yuri's resistance to her feelings because she wants to return home to the hot, smutty bits that happened between the two. The tension was electrifying. And just the patience Kale had for her to wait, whew, he had his faults with her, but the control he had when he wasn't thinking with his little brother was, oh, he definitely respected her viewpoint. I did also grow to like Yuri and the adversities she overcame. The fear she showed at the beginning and her drive for finding a way back home felt realistic to me. She was only 15 and missed her family. She almost had her first romance. It's like, any possible teenage girl's dreams, right? Even her denials and her feelings for Kale because she thought they wouldn't be together was never annoying for me. Despite my fantasy of wanting to be isekai somewhere, I would miss my family and home. I honestly don't even think I would be as good as her in all she accomplished through the story. I would prefer to be a mob character where there wasn't so much pressure placed on me and someone wasn't after my life. The other two characters I liked was Prince Zenanza, Kale's treasured half-brother, and Ramses. I'm not sure how accurate the history was, but keep in mind this is set in the past geographically near Egypt, where Nefertiti was also present. I'm not well versed in the specifics of history, but I have heard of these two, and so it was definitely interesting how the mangaka included these in the story, and I never felt like they portrayed the history incorrectly. It felt natural to me in the narrative. I would say they were two rivals to Prince Kale that helped him realize his feelings for Yuri. These two definitely pulled at my heartstrings too. The gentle type versus the seemingly laid back yet charismatic type. Honestly, if Yuri had landed in Egypt and had to go against Nefertiti, Ramses, the latter type, would probably have been the male lead, and I wouldn't have really minded that too much either. Ramses really had the same mindset as Kale. Egypt was in a bad place where royalty was corrupt and he wanted to take over, but was looking for the person who would help him rule. And of course, he found that in Yuri. His constant testing and pursuit of Yuri continued to irk Kale, but also made him acknowledge that this was the one man they would always end up in a draw. Oh, and let's not forget about the conflict and drama that Queen Akia continued to cause. While this moved the story forward, it made me want to jump into the manga and just, you know. Anyways, suffice to say, she definitely made a good antagonist who was driven by an obsession to be at the top for herself and for, her son. While it became expected that she would do something in the story to cause further distress for Yuri and Kale, I never felt like it became repetitive or boring. I think what baffled me was just how the ending had basically pointed out to me that everything could have been resolved if her son, who's actually very sweet and admires Prince Kale, had taken action. But he was pretty young, even younger than Yuri, so he may have wanted to concede to his mother and was probably very unaware of why her mother was behaving like this. It didn't help that Prince Kale, who also adored him, was trying to keep how horrible his mother was a secret from him. Now, this next part will contain spoilers as I dive a little into my favorite parts of the story. With the many arcs, my favorite was when there was a civil war occurring within the Hittite Empire. Yuri and Kale had separated to handle two separate situations, and Yuri had volunteered to be the commander for one of the expeditions. Her growth here and how she used the knowledge she learned from Kale was chef's kisses. Like, she was able to pull off some of the strategies Prince Kale had done and used it to her advantage. She also proved to the men during this expedition that women are just as capable. And I do love when the female protagonists aren't being overpowered by the men. Like, they use their brains, and even like their physical strength was very good too. I mean, I definitely love the women who were by Yuri's side. I think I'm just someone who really likes it when the characters I like shine or show some character growth. And the events that followed after this with Kale was just like everything fell together for the two, although sadly at the expense of never being able to see her family and friends again. One small part I also really liked was when Yuri met Ramses when she escorted Prince Ananza to Egypt to be wed with their princess. She felt guilty because before this, the princes all had to compete to decide who would head to Egypt to be wed. While this would be advantageous because of the conflict between the Hittites and the Egyptians, but at the same time be thrown into a place where he could die at any moment with the previous king having died strangely. Yeah, that was a mouthful. Sadly, they were tricked by Queen Akia's men, and Prince Ananza died while Yuri had been shot by an arrow and was hanging on to her life. Here she meets Ramses and forces him to take her to the meeting place where the Egyptians and Hittites gather to discuss the disappearance of Prince Ananza. When she learns Ramses is heading there, she arrives in the nick of time and tries to prove it was Queen Akia, the culprit behind the murder and the start of this dispute with the Egyptians. Of course, sadly, Queen Akia gets away with it, and it definitely irked me how she always got away with things. Justice was just so much harder to prove back then, where it was hard to find evidence. And I was also sad that one of my favorite characters died. Even when it was obviously her, she used her status as queen and later queen dowager to get away with things. Like, people just let her do it. Like, they never really questioned her. Although there was a time when they did question her, and she did threaten them with saying that she would have her own country that she came from, like, war with the Hittite Empire. And her country was Babylonia, which in the story, and maybe historically too, was a very big presence too at the time. So despite being about 28 volumes long, the story was pretty well paced, and despite the obstacles Yuri and Kale overcame, the relationship, bond with the other characters, and just the emotional turmoil they went through really drew me to the story. There were some parts that annoyed me and where I wanted to rush through because I really wanted to go back to some of my favorite characters' viewpoints, but overall, maybe that was the point of it, right? Of the story, to make me want to feel like that. I'm definitely now someone who enjoys more wholesome manga, mainly with characters who are older, but my fingers will itch sometimes to go through the whole volumes in one sitting. You know, me and my binge problems. The next isekai manga I constantly go back to is Kanata Kara, or from the English licensed version, From Far Away. As if to foreshadow her journey, Noriko Tachibana has been having weird dreams about a different fantastical world. Going home with her friends from school, she stumbles upon a paper bag and literally gets blown up into a new world. There, the world is not as rainbows and butterflies as she thinks, and she finds herself in a strange forest with terrifying caterpillar-looking bugs that would eat her for dinner. She is saved by Isark, the male lead who has superhuman strength. Noriko is then thrown into the world where she does not speak the language and is placed into situations where her life is always in constant danger. Because she was unfamiliar with the situation and language, she didn't understand that she was the awakening who would be able to control the sky demon Isark. Those who could control both the awakening and sky demon would be able to rule the world. Or so prophecy says. I don't consider this as spoilers because it was very obvious to us, the readers, that this was the case. While there was a lot of saving the damsel in distress in the story, I was never bothered by it, and it really made sense to me. Like, Noriko is an ordinary high school girl who didn't know what sort of role she played in this world and why she was brought there in the first place. While she went through the usual emotions of fear, wanting to return home, and feeling helpless, this was where she decided to not mope around and be useful, because everyone around her was working so hard to help her. She also didn't understand why they were doing this when she felt so useless. And so she decides to learn the language and keeps an optimistic attitude. I definitely understood her emotions as a person who likes to be useful, especially to those who help me. On the other hand, Isark has this sort of stoic facade where he is internally struggling to control himself from being overtaken by his monster counterpart. While Noriko's heart is on her sleeve, Isark tries to hide himself behind this mask. Noriko appearing before him begins to bring this monster out. And I honestly felt like it was more so because he was unsure of who he really was, and her presence made him have to think about this more. With all the characters that came along the way, I definitely found myself enjoying these two the most and their character development. Noriko's feelings of self-worth and Isark's identity crisis, and how they moved from this either together, separately, or through the help of their friends was just so for me. And you may be seeing this trend right now, but gosh, Isark is one good-looking male lead. I just loved watching him grow from creating a wall between him and Noriko to slowly opening himself up to her by teasing her and laughing. It was just so wholesome. Now, this part will contain spoilers as I dive into my favorite parts amongst many in this manga. When Noriko finds out she's the awakening, I was on my toes to see what would happen. For some background context, when Noriko began to understand the language and would hear people around her talking about where the awakening appeared from, she began to wonder at the coincidence because she had been at the same place when she woke up. But she was in denial because she didn't think she could be this sort of ethereal being that everyone was making the awakening out to be. Now, back to the scene, they were in a terrible situation where Isark was facing this weird liquid form being, Lord Silent Mask, and a prophet who worked for Lord Ratchev, who is the antagonist, found out the two's real identity. She reveals this to Noriko, and with the confirmation, Noriko realizes why Isark had not wanted to accept her affections. Again, just for some background context, Noriko had confessed to Isark. There was a time where she was in danger, and Isark had, of course, come to her rescue. He had started to turn to the Sky Demon when she kissed him and told him that she didn't want him to leave her because she loved him. It was so sweet and cute. Anyways, after Isark defeats this creature, he rushes to help Noriko, who is in the middle of being kidnapped. The prophet flees, and the two are left alone. A teary-eyed Noriko and worried Isark. When Isark reveals he knew Noriko was the Awakening, she felt even more despair that she had been tormenting him the whole time, and said she wouldn't stay by his side anymore and burden him. Right then and there, he also confessed that he couldn't be without her and wanted her to be by his side, even if he becomes the Sky Demon. Oh, and he kissed her too. I mean, oh gosh. Yay for you, Noriko. And let me just tell you, my heart was bursting with both joy and sadness. I mean, as you can tell, I feel it even now just thinking about it and telling you all about this. He was trying so hard to deny his feelings for her because he didn't want to hurt her, since he was literally transforming into the Sky Demon and could harm her. But at the same time, afraid to, afraid of his own feelings for her. Yes, I'm a romantic and I don't care. I just love seeing scenes like this. As you can see, this manga is pretty different from Red River, which is why I had a hard time choosing between the two. Kanata Kara is more on the fantasy side with dragons, magic, and so on, where Red River was more on the historical, dramatic side. Yet both really appealed to me in the same way, such as the character growth and relationship between the male leads. There was never any toxic behavior between the two, and even with the tension, they ended up reconciling without anything too dramatic occurring between the two. And so, I'm just gonna leave it at that for this video. What did you all think? Or did you expect these two Isekai manga to be mentioned? Have you heard of them before? Did you think that I was gonna talk about like Inuyasha or something, which is I would say a very popular Isekai manga, or I would consider it to be Isekai actually. But yeah, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you want to know more Isekai manga suggestions. I am definitely still on that trope even to this day, and I've been reading so many. So, if you want to hear more, let me know. I do tend to be a little bit pickier, but I also have a guilty pleasure of reading any that comes my way. So if you have any suggestions, let me know too, and I will try them out on my end. But yeah, I hope you like this video, and please like and subscribe. Bye!